multiple reasons I reached out to you. One is I think from the first interview I heard you do, I was like, oh, now here's, and I'm going to go ahead and be a little more crass than I usually am on the show and say, here is a person who is not going to piss on my shoes and tell me it's raining. And so started following you on Twitter and other places. And then when your book came out, got your book. I have a slightly jokey first question for you, which is,
Okay.
are you getting royalties from the Harris campaign for the freedom and the weird construction? Because I feel like both of those things were quite prominent in your book.
No, I don't get royalties, but my
Damn.
royalty is freedom for everyone. Nobody's free until everyone's free, right? What has
Mm-hmm.
always motivated me is the saving of the republic, you know? So like if I can get some credit, great, because I want other people to call me so that I
Mm-hmm.
can fix their stuff too, right? But I mean, I got to tell you, I attended the DNC this year. It was my first time ever
Mm,
attending something like that. I don't come from party politics. I come from the analytic,
right.
academic training pollster world, and it's like very there's supposed to be a wall of separation with that, and there is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I used to teach about convention effects and how to strategic goals of convention. So it was really cool to be there. But I got to tell you, when they started with the freedom on the stage, right? The big
Mm-hmm.
lights, and then the miniature American flags and the USA chants. And I was like, dude, I could literally die happy now. Okay. You know what I mean? If it wasn't for the down ballot, which we'll talk about quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit, because strategically that shift that you've seen with the Harris campaign, which I call negative partisanship strategy, and
Mm-hmm.
lay out in the book, that shift is not universal, right? Like it's not
Right.
this, the tester race isn't running like that. The
Yeah.
Brown race isn't running like that. So still lots of work to do. And I'm still like, I hope spring's eternal. So there's 40 days, 39 days left. And there's still time to fix your strategy if you haven't done it yet.
Right. And I definitely want to talk about this because I think it intersects a lot with the things that uh, we keep looking at in publicly available polls. But maybe just out of curiosity, what got you to make your switch from that more academic pollster side to the strategy and democratic politics side of things?
This Cassandra curse that I have, I guess, I mean, like it was crazy to me that now I understand it because I've been researching like the rise of the Third Reich for 4 years. Okay.
Mm,
And really totalitarianism and how public mass behavior responds to the situation. So now I understand it is an incredibly difficult human thing to get humans to imagine a worst case scenario and take it in a serious light, right?
yes.
But I have been cursed with that. And so when Trump and Ronna McDaniel and others in the RNC and Bill Barr, the attorney general, then were flying around America putting an infrastructure to pretend that Trump won on election night and then tried to steal the election backwards. Like I could see it happening in plain sight. I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they're going to transfer power, right? Like, I don't think they're just going to lose, right? And so to answer your question, it's that capability. And then on election night 2020, I was so happy because I knew right. I mean, the announcement and the official results were days later, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm an analyst and a pollster and a good one. So I knew we had won the Midwest and thus the blue wall and thus 270. Okay. Pretty
Mm,
early. And I felt like $1,000,000, right? Because I had consumed my academic career by that point. I was focused on not normalizing Trump rather than keeping my own job and being an analyst, right?
mm-hmm.
And I knew that night so I felt great. And then 20 minutes later or something, like the House races start coming in. And the Democrats lose them, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
I knew the door knocking suspension because Trump's campaign never stopped for COVID, and ours and the
Right.
Dems did, right? All of them did. I thought it might have an impact because in poli sci, like we analyze a lot of stuff to see if it's going to matter on vote choice and turnout. And the one thing that really, really does have an impact is in-person field. So I thought like it would be a strategic disadvantage, but it was much worse than I could have anticipated. And then in addition to that, I mean, how do you let 19 districts of people go and vote for Joe Biden, and then the Republican Trump enabler down ballot. And the reason, the
Mhm.
answer, I knew the answer to that. The answer is strategy, right? So
Mm.
I decided that night, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pull this off. Because, like, again, I run in this other world that's parallel. But I did have one person who I thought I could reach and convince because he already got it. And that person was Jamie Harrison, the chair of the DNC.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that was really like what I was able to start moving and pushing some of these strategic approaches through the DNC in 22 and, and here and now. And what we really have is a system that has been adjusted to meet the moment. In 22, I mean, people are very worried right now about the certification process, and they should be, because when you look at what's happening in Georgia, it's very clear that these anti-Democrats, and I mean small d Democrats, are planning on not giving the state to Harris if they can, right?
Mhm.
And that was the scenario that I was looking at through 2021, through 2022, till that Dobbs moment, which changed the fundamentals. I was looking at a scenario in which we were going to, if we lose 40 House seats in the 2022 midterms, we're probably going to lose at least one of the governorships of those three blue wall states.
Right.
And then if we did that, we would be in a position in 2024, this is me then looking out 3 years, where we may not even have a free and fair election. There may not even be a point of having an election because,
Mhm.
that they're so willing to do this terrible stuff with the infrastructure they control. So now, we did get enough shift in that strategy. I mean, the Whitmer race was just so great in Michigan. It really is a perfect example of what I'm trying to teach people to do. She defined her opponent, Tudor Dixon, as an extremist on abortion. She centralized all the messaging around that. And by end of September, about this time in 2022, that race was off the board. Okay.
Right.
Which is amazing because it was a midterm cycle, and Whitmer had all that baggage from COVID and all this crap, right? But they ran good strategy, and good strategy matters. And so,
Mhm.
that's what this mission has always been about. The book was a me like trying to think, okay, how can I get this information to as many executors as possible? And I'm not an executor,
Right.
I'm a strategist, right? Like,
Right.
so, I'm very delighted that the book had the impact in the industry that it's a book written for regular people, but you really have to
Mhm.
be very wonky, right? To want to people like your
Yes.
audience would enjoy the book, right? But
Right.
like, it's not a book that you're going to, see like Atomic Habits or something like that, right? And,
Yes.
I'm so delighted that people are trying it. I knew that if we ever tested negative partisanship strategy, it would work. I knew it would work because it would have already worked for them, right? I mean, I'd go into
Mhm.
these meetings and people would be like, well, Rachel, like research shows that people don't like these negative attacks. I'm like, oh yeah, well, why is Ron DeSantis sitting in the Florida governorship? Did he run
Yes.
your strategy?
Yeah.
Ran mine. Okay. Like,
Right.
and it worked just fine with swing voters. Okay. Swing voters, same voter pool that you're arguing will not like this stuff, is doing it on the other side, so it's exciting to see it being implemented. I do wish that we could see it universally in time
Mhm.
for November 5th, because, the stakes are so high for our democratic republic here.
You have teed up at least three things that I wanted to um, sort of smack down, I guess, with you. Um, and the first one is something that comes up in conversations among some of the pollsters and forecasters, and thinking about how they might model the electorate and model the outcomes and so on. And that is this notion of the median voter theory. And you do a great job in the book of both explaining it and also kind of talking about its limitations. But maybe just explain for people who don't know what that is, and how that kind of came to be taken as a way of figuring out what a candidate's positions or a party's positions ought to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, median voter theory argues that the candidate that positions themselves policy wise most squarely towards the center of the electorate will have an edge. Okay. And so, again, you can see where it doesn't work, because did Ron DeSantis sequester himself most closely to the median policy preference of Florida people? No, he did not. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
yet he won, right? So, there's limitations. I will say this, though, the broader concept of median voter theory kind of is happening a little bit right now in terms of the realignment of these two parties, and
Mm.
particularly on our side, the Democratic side, because this is a party that is capitalizing on abandoned median voter territory, on things
Mm.
like national security, on things like economics with this tariff stuff, right? So like we are actually seeing in the aggregate, this broad style, some, some, not, I don't want to say proof of the medium, but some where that theory still has some relevance, right?
Hmm.
And we're going to see, like, the Democrats, as Trump has pushed this party further and further to the right, the Democrats have been absorbing, right? And that's what that
Right.
convention theme was all about, right?
Hmm.
Building this new coalition of, basically college educated voters. The Republican Party dominated, especially off year elections for a long time, because they had an advantage with one particular group of people. That is a very important advantage to have, even though the broader population is disproportionately not college educated.
Right.
The 50% of the population of Virginia that votes is,
Hmm.
okay,
Hmm.
is disproportionately educated. And so, Republicans are making gains in places where voters have very weak turnout,
Hmm.
and Democrats are making gains in the one area, white suburbanites, especially, right? White
Hmm.
suburbanites, but now the suburbs are diverse as suburbanites in general, college educated suburbanites who have always voted Republican, and it's based on that brand allegiance, broad based brand stuff, good on the
Hmm.
economy, good on national defense. Well, the more those two things are undermined by Trump, the better the pickup odds are for Democrats. So even though it doesn't work in a swing race, I'm going to poll test. This is the stuff that matters to voters. I mean, this is
Hmm.
unfortunately how some of our races are running today. It makes me ill, right? Like, oh, let's do this, thing, and try to, like, appeal on a policy. Oh, I'm going to be more on your side.
Right.
Like, that's not how Republicans are doing their strategy in Montana, in Ohio,
Yeah.
in Texas. In fact, it's what I've tried to teach people is it's persuasion but it's a different style of persuasion. Our old stool median voter persuasion is to sell a product, right? To
Yeah.
sell a voter on buying a product.
That has
And their
features and benefits.
persuasion,
Yeah.
and this is universal now across their swing races, is opposite. It's to make sure the other product won't be bought in a
Hmm.
two-part product system. It's winning by disqualification of the other option, right? And that's how
Right.
they do persuasion. And that's why, if you watch what they're doing, what are they doing? They're doing ads about little girls getting tackled by Colin Allred while they're playing sports, because men in sports, like, they're wedging that one trans sports issue because they know it's deeply unpopular outside of progressives. Okay. It's not something
Hmm.
that average middle class people support, the idea of men and women's sports. And so, that's persuasion argument, guys. It is. It's
Hmm.
just, and what I've been trying to get Democrats to understand is, like, Republicans figured out we can have one message that both drives turnout and persuades by pushing voters away from the other party. And that's
Right.
a very strong advantage, because humans are not designed the way that we're designing our campaign comms. Like, the actual human beings that we're targeting don't think, work, or have psychological characteristics that our
Yeah.
system seems to assume that they have.
Well, and I think that that is the reason I kind of wanted to start there was I think that one of the things I keep encountering as I look into these methods of um, what what do we test and how do we come up with our forecasts, and what are the even the kind of earliest ones, which are the earliest models, which are very much about sort of taking the who's the incumbent party in power and what's the last 6 months of GDP and what's my calculated expected marginal utility of voting for one candidate or another. And it's like, that's cute, economists. Does anyone
Yes.
actually do this math? I don't think that they do this math. And I think the thing about median voter theory is it does give you an idea of, like, well, where is the most mass of support for a set of policies or issues, but it can become very kind of bureaucratic really quickly. And, like, well, if we just put together a slate of issues and say our position on these issues, that ought to win the day.
Right.
And to your point, that's not how that works. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you do such a great job of talking about this, is the swing voter. Because I think there is a lot of difference in how one group of pundits might talk about the swing voter versus another. Um, and I think this has been especially true over the last few weeks in talking about Kamala Harris. I wrote something for the Substack for the show last week about this. the kind of, okay, the switch happens, time for Harris to introduce herself to the American voter and for her to define herself before Trump can define her. And then, daily think pieces about whether or not voters know her enough. And that the answer to getting to know her is for her to come out and describe her policy positions. And, I interview normal people all the time. Many of them are not college educated because I do a lot of work with people who are thinking about going to college and have never been. But this is not how people make decisions. And I know this in consumer world, right? Talk about who the swing voter really is.
It's so frustrating too, because it's so weird to me. I mean, it was weird to me, and that's why I had to write the book, right? The first half of the book, before I get into any of these strategic mechanics, the first half of the book is the voter doesn't know anything. Like, we've known that right. for decades. Like, and when I mean nothing, I mean nothing. Okay. Like, they know who the president is. Some of them might know who the vice president is. They know there's a separation of power system and checks and balances, but they don't understand that at all. They don't know who Mike Johnson is. They don't know who their House member is. They sure as hell don't know who their state legislator is. And they don't even know how to separate between state and federal politics. Okay. Like, that's the reality. And yet, like, for decade after decade, including up to this today, right now, if I turned on MSNBC or CNN or Harry Enton or Nate Silver or any of these guys, this part of the reality of the electorate is completely ignored and disappeared, right? And anybody who actually talks to strangers about politics outside of living in San Fran, New York, and DC and attending one of those elite schools, because I didn't come from that, right? I came from a community college. I mean, it wasn't long for me to figure out nobody cares about the shit I care about. Okay. Right. I can't go out and have a combo with my friends about a motion to vacate. Okay. That's not right. That's not something they're going to be into, dude. And it's just astounding to me how hard it is for people to internalize this, because I'll give a speech on the book and I lay this out, look me out and political science, I don't know. And then an hour later, I'll be talking to someone and, I'll hear them make the mistake. They in our mind, people who are listening to this show, people who are reporting on elections, people, analysts, even good ones like Kornacki, in their mind, everyone's paying attention and has this base of knowledge. And that's who the swing voter is. Somebody who you have to appeal to with this, better platform of fully fleshed out plans, right? And it's totally fucking wrong. It doesn't exist at all, right? And so for me, actually, going back, the reason I came after Silver and Wasserman, I mean, I didn't mean to come after them, but I was just coming into the conversation about election forecasting, was, the inability to A, account for that, and B, account for how, because of that, how much polarization was impacting mass voter behavior, right? And now people have caught up to that. They still aren't handling it well, in my argument. And you'd see that if you read my analysis versus theirs, right? But it is at least something that they acknowledge. These economic models are no longer powerful because the main explanatory variable in a model now is not the economy. It is partisanship and hyperpartisanship. And it has washed away a lot of that economic power. Now, economy can matter in a crisis, a great recession level event. Okay. Some mild inflation one way or the other, without a recession, it's not going to have an impact. And so getting people to update their priors on how they're talking and analyzing stuff has been a real struggle, not just in the consultant, candidate, practical politics world I'm in, but still in the analytical world. And, swing voters, the other day, MSNBC did a focus group, and Alex Wagner asked her focus group, how many had ever heard of Dobbs? Okay. One dude. Okay. One dude. And she was shocked. Right. And I'm like, why are we still shocked about this? Because the answer is we're not. There seems to be a reticence, especially among liberal who do control a lot. I mean, even Nate Silver is voting for Harris, right? There seems to be a reticence in admitting the problem. The problem here in America, folks, it's being manifested through this Republican cult problem. But the problem is us. Okay? It's a sick political culture. We raise people to be embarrassed to skip a Peloton workout and be proud that they don't vote. That's a problem. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always a problem, as these political scientists kind of, who first started working on this would point out, but now it's a huge problem because of the digital environment that we live in and the way that information is siloed. And, most people, this is shocking to others, right? I get it every day on my Twitter thread. Most people don't watch any news at all. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if they even, and the ones that even say they watch news, actually they mean the local news, which is like
Yep.
weather and sports and whatever, right? They don't mean like they're watching Meet the Press, dude.
No.
You know what I mean? And that's why, like, with Project 2025, that operation, which started a year ago and is now, like, bearing fruit, was so important, because I knew that unless the media and the grassroots could get it on the media and the campaigns would talk about it, we would go into Election Day, November 5th, and 85% of people who cast ballots in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, especially those swing ballots, will have never heard of Trump's plan to do Project 2025, right? So
Right.
like it started off at like 5% public knowledge. And now, if I had to measure it today, it's still only like 50%. There are still millions of swing voters in those states that I just talked about who don't know abortion is illegal. Like and you hear this
Right.
all the time from the clinic operators. So, people walk in there. That's the first time that they find
Mm-hmm.
out, oh, I'm caught in this cog of this weird public policy thing. Okay.
Yep.
Let alone know, oh, it's because Donald Trump overturned Roe and Ron DeSantis enacted an abortion ban. Right.
Right.
And so our duty to inform, our strategic approach shifts from duty to persuade on particulars to, holy shit, maybe we just better tell swing voters what's happening in time
Right.
for them to decide whether they want it to happen to them.
Yes. And I think this gets to another, I mean, the thing that I particularly appreciated about this part of the book actually is that, years ago, I did the only set of politics focus groups I've ever done. And it was with independent voters in the collar counties around Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. And two things happened that stood out to me that I just, when you're talking to people about, where they want to get a tech certification for their next job, or what they want to, how they feel about a particular consumer packaged goods brand or something like that. People do say crazy stuff. Don't get me wrong. Like they say stuff where you're like, oh, you think, I mean, the craziest things I've probably ever heard from people were in focus groups I did about the HPV vaccine when that was being rolled out. All kinds of.
I got to tell you, I'm not going to interrupt, but I have to tell you, I have a deep interest in all this consumer shit, because like that's not something I have a toe in right now. And it's interesting to me because I started doing this. I'm like, man, you start broadening it out to like products and advertising and marketing. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yes.
All right, go on.
Well, and you would love it. You would absolutely love it because you do get to encounter people thinking about seemingly lower stakes things, not the HPV vaccine necessarily, but
Right.
other things that are just sort of normal decisions in their lives. And you get glimpses into how much they understand about the category, or how much they understand about how retail works, or how much they understand about just the world around them and how that functions. And the way that manifested in, I mean, the HPV vaccine one was fascinating because I remember in one of our focus groups, we had a woman who was a nurse. She was a registered nurse, and she did not know the names of women's body parts.
Oh my God.
And so was very confused about the descriptions of the products, because HPV causes multiple forms of cancer, and so you're listing out all the
vaccine for your children. If you're listening to this, don't sentence them to death because you have some holdup about young people having sex. Go on.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just this like, wow, okay, like you went to school for this, but you still don't, and you've had children. You're in here because you're a mom, and you don't know the names of your own body parts. Okay, good to know.
Nurse. She's a nurse.
She's a nurse and doesn't know. Exactly.
That should terrify you, right?
Yes, absolutely. I did a project last year about maternal health and health during pregnancy. I interviewed all these women, all of whom had a traumatic experience in pregnancy. Every last one of them. The only woman who said that she did not have a traumatic pregnancy said that she didn't. I mean, she almost died and her body will never be the same, but it was fine. And so like you get to hear how people understand the world, and
Yes.
that it doesn't match up with what your expectations are, especially if you're you know, someone who reads a lot of books and went to
Yes.
college and graduate school and all of that kind of stuff, right? So it's
Yes.
like getting it's why I like it is like I'm just curious about other people. The one time I did politics focus groups in Pennsylvania, independent voters, I started by just saying, so you know, I live in Long Island. I'm not from around here, but how you guys doing? And they all knew that they were here for a politics focus group. So their answer to the question, "How are you doing?" was potholes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Literally, like the first thing someone yells out is potholes. And after like the third group, I realized, well, it is spring in Pennsylvania, in the collar counties. The roads suck right now. No
Hmm.
wonder you're talking to me about potholes. And you know,
Yep.
you were screened to come talk about politics. And
Yep.
to you, politics is who's going to fix the road.
Yep. That's exactly right. Good job.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All kinds of other crazy
But like,
things
no, the
got
point
said,
is,
but
like, if you had done it in November, it'd have been something else, right? Like
right.
we're in July, right? Like it wouldn't
Yes.
have been potholes, right?
It
Yeah.
wouldn't have been
Yep.
potholes. And at the same time, you also just had like, I mean, there was, I felt bad afterwards. There one group, seemed sort of left leaning. They were like closer into Philadelphia proper. It was a very diverse group. They were a little younger. And this one guy literally started talking about chemtrails. And for a second, I thought he was kidding. And I half laughed before I realized he wasn't
Oh,
kidding.
he wasn't kidding.
And then I sort of was like, okay, I have to do a whole different level of poker face than I usually do in focus groups
I
for this.
couldn't do it, dude. I am so proud of all of you because, like, when you're dumb and stupid and like nuts, it shows right here. That's why I never run for office, man.
All right, we will
Never.
keep you in the back room. You can stay in
Oh
the
yeah,
back
yeah.
room. But I think the thing that's fascinating about it is, you know, and like the maternal health project, the other thing a woman said to me was she alluded to, she got real close to saying the words and she didn't say the words and it was okay because I knew what she meant. And she was talking about, um, you know, she was clearly conservative and she was upset about the use of the phrase in her obstetrics clinic, pregnant people.
Oh yeah.
And I realized in the way she was talking about it that two things bothered her about it. One was just she was more culturally conservative. The other is that the entire experience of being pregnant was a depersonalized experience. She's passed around from doctor to doctor. Whoever's on that day is who she sees. The first kid she had, the doctor she thought was going to deliver her child did not deliver it. This is a common story, of course, that no one realizes until they get into the delivery room, that their doctor who's been with them through the whole pregnancy is probably not on duty the day that the kid decides to come.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so now someone else is in the room with you. She felt so unseen that being called a pregnant person was just another way of being
Invisible.
erased out of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
room. And so like that very real experience for her, she was extrapolating to everything else related to non-binary people. and and so people make these decisions. And I think the thing that's interesting about that is nevertheless they need some kind of heuristic if they are minded towards voting. You know, if their parents vote, as you laid out, like your parents voted or they told you it was
Yes.
important to vote or you learned to vote in college or wherever you learn to vote, you learn to vote. If they're still in that group of people and yet are not they have not picked a brand that they're going to align themselves with. There are no jerseys hanging in their closets. They have to make a decision somehow. And it seemed like one of the cases you made was a sort of general, if I'm not feeling good about the way things are going, and a heuristic of anti-incumbency.
Yep.
Maybe talk a bit about how like that feels like a thing. Everyone's trying to figure out how the undecided voter is going to split by party affiliation, doing the like forced lean question or
Yep.
something else. What's a more useful way for pollsters to think about what's going on with undecideds, especially in a condition that we're in now, where it's like sort of two incumbents and sort of not two incumbents?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I mean, there's so many different ways to tackle that, but like, I think about 2020. I knew exactly how undecided voters were going to break, and that's why I was willing to publish it in the New York Times like a year before Election Day. Right? And it was going to break against Trump because he's so controversial. He's such a shit show. There's so much negative press about him. These are people who have no interest in politics, as you just pointed out, and I write in the book. They had that socialization. When I do a speech, doesn't matter if it's 20 people in the room or 600 or 1,000. usually I'll say something along the lines of like, of this topic, we're talking about this, and I'll say, look, how many of you guys had parents to vote? And I know that every hand's going to go up, every
Right.
single hand in the room when I ask the
Mm-hmm.
question, right? Because that's that intervening event. But
Right.
these folks aren't us. They're not necessarily, they might even be intellectuals in other ways, but they're not intellectually curious about this, about government,
Right.
about politics, and about news.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that has shaped our life, you sitting there, me sitting here, people listening to this, is shaped by our interest in this topic. When you have an interest in something, you'll learn a lot about it. If you
Right.
don't, like I don't care about opera, and I know
Mm-hmm.
that there was Pavarotti, but I can't name a contemporary opera singer. I can't. I don't know a single one, okay? Because I
Mm-hmm.
don't care. I don't read about it. I don't follow it. That, my friends, is the main thing happening in our culture. It's not
Right.
suppression and all of this, though those things impact turnout. It's interest. And so because these swing voters are not interested, but they've been socialized into the civic role of rendering a verdict, they're going to be extremely sensitive to fundamentals. So in 2020, there was such a strong out party fundamental backlash to not a normal president, because he's not normal. Trump's never been normal. He's never going to
Mm-mm.
be normal. And that's why incumbency advantage was not such a great advantage for him. It was more the backlash referendum effect. And then in this cycle, we were really looking at another 16, which is what in my academic book, I have a chapter called Everybody Sucks 2016, because fair or not, voters
Mm-hmm.
hated Clinton and Trump equally. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it became, okay, well, how do you guess which way the double haters are going to break? They're going to break for the party, the change candidate. Okay. Because I
Mm-hmm.
used to say out of party, but I want to say change this time, the change candidate, which in 2016 was not Clinton, it was Trump, because 8 years of Obama and Clinton being in the
Right.
administration. So this time around, we had double haters again. Fair or not, people hated Biden just like they hated Donald Trump. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if it's true or fair; just matters what people think and feel. And then
Right.
because he was old, they hated him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to be, to me, an advantage for the outside, for the non-incumbent, right? But now, because of the switch, and when I talk about the switch, I always have a capital T and a capital S, because I knew it was going to totally alter all the fundamentals. And it
Right.
has. It's taken this race from always toss up because of the EC, the Electoral College, toss up advantage Trump was the old stasis, and the new
Mm-hmm.
stasis, and the stasis we'll be at heading into election day is toss up advantage Harris, right?
Mm.
The main reason that happened is because instead of double haters, now we have just one set of haters. And these independents don't see Harris as continuity. They see her as change. And
Right.
the advantage of being undefined really, really shows when you look at her favorabilities. Because, like when the switch happened, I'm like, dude, Silver 538, all these people better not be putting out models using this old data, because it's not going to be correct. You're going to have to wait a whole month and get a whole clean
Mm-hmm.
data set, because the way people were assessing Harris is somebody they don't even know of. Okay. They don't, different
Right.
now. Right. And so really Democrats have backdoored into at the presidential level, the perfect scenario. You have a candidate that has a lot of charisma and is good on the stump. Great
Mm-hmm.
messenger. No one knows anything about her, which is,
Mm-hmm.
on our TV, such a big problem. No, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
What I would tell you is big asset, right? And so where Biden was in trouble is like, okay, how much money can you spend to try to tell people who don't know and don't care about your record, your real record? And they dropped $200 million and moved nothing on that effort,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so hard to hit people today in the
Right.
digital age, right? And so I knew right away, I was like, oh, they're going to have like 90 days to define Harris. Ain't going to happen. Ain't going to happen. And, in the case of their strategy, you have, because of that window, where that vacuum where they're going to try to negatively define her, they've done such a great job running the biographical stuff. Usually that stuff to me is all fluff, but in
Right.
this election cycle, was for that candidate in this scenario, which is so, it's a weird
Mm-hmm.
scenario I've never been in before. So to answer your question, this is what I would tell you. I'm feeling pretty damn good that when one of these say there's 10 of these disaffected swing voters that don't care and don't know anything,
Mm-hmm.
I think she's going to take at least 6 of them.
That's super interesting. It's also interesting to think about the unknown narrative. Because my question was, at what point do you guys decide that, not only do you guys, meaning pundits, decide that uh, not being well known, and I'll just say what I think when I hear that from consumer research. It's we have a phrase called mental availability, which is just like, I've heard of it. It's not recall. The way we don't test that with recall. We test that with recognition. So when
Okay.
you see this can, or you even
Right.
just see this much, you know what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have to show you the label because
Yeah.
you've seen it a million times,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
that
This
is
is interesting.
9/10 of the battle for any brand, is mental
Yeah, yeah.
availability. I have heard
Yeah,
of
oh
you. I
yes,
have ever seen
definitely.
you.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah.
And so my feeling about I just don't feel like I know enough about her is just a misstatement of what they mean, which is, she's not familiar enough to me yet.
Yes.
I'm not used to her.
Yes.
And that is seeming to work in her favor. I was listening
Yes.
to The Next Level, and Sarah Longwell was talking about this. Like, the more people are exposed to her, the more they like her.
No
So that's
doubt.
good.
Well,
That's
when you
good news.
have a public that knows very little about the government, and you have a Republican Party that's spent 15 years purging moderates and is kind of collapsed into this movement, in the
Hmm.
best of times, it's hard to make policy in the United States of America. That's why the other democracies that followed us went with a different model. They were like, presidential doesn't seem so great, right?
Yeah.
And so even in the best of times, it's very hard to pass a piece of public policy through our system. And folks, this is not the best of it's okay, we're not living
No.
through the best of times. So one thing you can count on for America, the American electorate, is this: they are always going to be unhappy with who's ever in office, because who's ever in office is always going to underdeliver what they promised, and because they have to. And it doesn't matter if it's Bernie fucking Sanders or
Hmm.
Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden, dude, you're getting under delivered. Okay. And we
Right.
call that in poli sci the expectations gap, the gap between what people have to tell an uninformed electorate who doesn't understand the complexity of making things happen. You have to tell them, I'm going to give you rainbow ponies, right?
Hmm.
And what you can actually do, even if you had an honest opposition situation, which is not what we're facing right now. And so
Right.
the whole long and the short of that is this: you're only new once, and it's always an asset when it comes to politics. You want to be
Yeah.
new, and you want people to not know shit about you. And so, like, all this hand wringing you see on the MSNBC panels, I mean, it's so frustrating to me, because I'm like, no, 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 you got this back ass words, dude.
Well, and I think you just said something that I find actually kind of answers my question about when does unknown become unknowable, and that becomes the story about her. And the answer is, well, you'd have had to start that 6 months ago.
Yes.
And so the 90 days to define Harris, and
Good
then no
luck.
one has the time.
Yeah,
Neither does the pundit class, to define
that's
her as some
right.
sort of cultural cipher that we will never really know. And this is why people feel the
But
way
they'll
that they do
still
about
die
it.
trying, Farrah.
I know.
You know what I mean? I mean, like, I was watching Simone Sanders, it's like they're like, well, all the policy details. And Simone's like, dude, it's about values. Okay. I mean, which is,
Hmm.
comes from a different line of research, but like, yes, it's guys, nobody cares except for you. I mean, Donald Trump told you a year ago, I'm going to round up all the brown people. I'm going to eliminate the Department of Education completely and get rid of federal control of all education. And I'm going to invoke a Smoot Harley tariff from the 18th century and ruin the economy. That shit's all in detail on his website. And somehow you don't talk about it ever, right? But when it
Right.
comes to Harris, like, oh, we got to know everything about her. So I'm glad the campaign has resisted giving into the chattering class, like,
Yeah.
analysis. And I honestly, like, would not even suggest listening to it. It's just so wrong. It's a lot of what you
Hmm.
hear. I'm here to tell you guys, a lot of what you're hearing on TV, what you're reading in the papers, or like even on a lot of the analysis stuff, it's just flat out not right.
So here I want to possibly pick a little fight, which is some of the stuff coming out of Blueprint around message testing
Okay.
and the kind of positioning. I mean, the way it's certainly, getting positioned by people who read the research is, people don't like the negative stuff. They like the positive stuff. They want vision and policy. And they don't want to hear any of the negative things. And so when they do their conjoint to test 15 different messages, the positive messages test better than the negative messages do. And the headline coming out of Blueprint that then gets picked up on MSNBC and among others is, well, that's what she should do. And then even this morning, I have, I guess, now been exposed to it so much I've developed an allergy to it. So I will just say that at the outset. If I have to hear one more person talk about she's got to go down to the border or she's got to go to wherever and she's got to lay out her policy and draw the contrast with Trump's policy,
No, dude.
and that's going to do it, that sounds to me like fighting to a draw at the absolute best, and also is probably going to miss the entire goddamn point.
So
Like,
these people and
yes.
this infrastructure that you just described, that's literally why I was like why I devoted my life to fixing because it's
Mm-hmm.
wrong. I mean, yes, we have lost a lot of great races with great message testing. Okay, we can go back through the graveyard, 2010, 2014, all the
Mm-hmm.
Southern Bloc, right? It never works. It didn't work in 22 for Tim Ryan, as I document in the book. Why? Because voters may not tell you negative messaging, especially negative partisan. It's not just negative messaging. What I'm doing is not negative messaging because it's been around for decades.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm telling people is you can take a message. It's easier to keep a product from being bought in a two product system. It's easier to shit on the other in a product that no one wants to buy because
Right.
it's not a Toyota truck versus a Ford. Okay, it's not
Right.
Coke and Pepsi. It's a product everyone hates. No one likes
Yes.
it.
No one likes any of the products.
So it's a
Yes.
lot easier to get people to not buy the other product when they have to make a choice than it is to convince them actually this product's pretty good, right? And so that's where their model and this strategy that loses us and is about to lose us control of the Senate is so fundamentally dangerous. And unfortunately, I didn't come up through the system. All that money
Mm-hmm.
that they waste on research over there. The Lincoln Project, dude, they don't test anything. Okay. And that's what I came in to like build Strike Pack, which I ended up having to give up because you can't do a super PAC if you aren't rich or connected. And I'm neither. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Was understanding like, no, Democrats just want to test the shit out of everything. Imagine we took that testing budget and employed it and spent it on distribution. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the proof to me is in the pudding. I mean, like I said, you can go to JD Vance, you can go to Ron DeSantis, to all these Republicans that are running and winning in swing states. Okay, none of them are doing the shit that these researchers are convinced you should do, Kamala. Okay, none of
Mm-hmm.
them. So don't listen to them, and call me.
Yeah, well, and I think that then, so this is great because I think one of the earliest questions I asked of someone on 20 episodes ago was like, this isn't something we do in marketing. We don't tend to tell you why you shouldn't buy the other product.
Yes,
For one
exactly.
thing, there's too many choices.
Yes, you
We'd be
can't.
here all day.
Yeah.
But for another, it's just it doesn't work. But we have, in any given category, there are things somebody wants to buy, and so you figure out who those people are and you get in front of them as much as you possibly can, and then they buy you, and that's very easy. We also don't make people pick one day every 4 years to buy their favorite thing in a category, so that
That's
helps.
true too.
But I think this is I mean, even just, my background is working in advertising as a strategist and then moving into market research. And so I do think about like, well, what are we going to air? Like,
Right.
what are we going to do in the market? What are you going to do in the business? And so that is the main reason actually I wanted to talk to you, was like, get an actual strategist in this conversation. The like, my policy versus their policy, obviously mine is better. I have done more homework and ticked more boxes and was nicer to you when I said it. That ought to do that ought to do the job. As a strategist, that looks to me, like I said, fighting to a draw. You lay out an approach to what you call negative partisan. Well, I don't know if you coined the phrase or not, but what you call in the book negative partisanship, and it really lays out a message structure that, if I'm capturing this correctly, is this kind of claim, blame, drive the wedge. And that is extremely powerful. Maybe just like talk through an example of how that works so that people understand the difference between state my policies, draw the contrast.
Yeah, and that's because it's trying to do two things. It's trying to win a horse race election in a swing race, district, state, whatever, in the moment of the now, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what it's trying to do is by doing it as a brand allegiance operation. Okay, so one thing that's very different from marketing, anything else except for politics, is, and it's the other part that I didn't to discuss. So we've laid out how dumb the electorate is civically. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
dumb civically. And that's why, and as a political scientist who started to write about this in the 50s said, don't worry, they don't need to know anything because they have a D and an R that will
Mm-hmm.
shortcut their cognition, right? They don't need to know anything about John Tester because they'll know he's a D, and they will be able
Mm-hmm.
to make their political calculations based on that. In fact, those political science said, wouldn't it be great if the parties were so different? Voters can
Yes.
easily tell, right? So
That
like
paper
that's
was
where
a
we're at.
curse.
Okay, now so it's important for people to understand this fact, and this is the other thing I can't get, silver and nobody. You never hear anybody on TV except for me talking about this. Partisanship is the be all end all. That's it. Like
Mm-hmm.
for 95% of any given swing race electorate, I don't have to know anything about them. All the demos that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
those tell me partisanship. Like I don't give a shit about the demos aside from helping to model partisanship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because if I knew nothing about you, audience, except for you're a black dot, I don't know if you're man, woman, college educated, rural, urban, whatever, dude. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter, but I know you're a Democrat or you're an independent that says they lean Democrat, or you're a Republican or an independent that says lean Republican, which is, by the way, 75% of that so-called giant independent pool are
Mm-hmm.
actually leaners. And
Yep.
people who do polling in the polarized era figured out not long ago to collapse
Yep.
those people down into the party categories, because when it comes to their behaviors, especially
Right.
vote choice, there's
Yeah.
no difference. They're basically closet partisans that don't want to admit, because the brands of both parties are so bad, that they're in one of them, but they are reliable partisans in terms of their political behavior, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's really important for people to understand, because the crux of this work is arguing you have to win the brand war. And for 15 years now, Republicans have figured this out. Once they got off the median voter model and started doing persuasion the way that I've described it, they have been brand assaulting us and tapping into what was already a natural regional realignment from the 60s, from the
Mm-hmm.
Civil and Voting Rights Act in the South, basically nationalizing the Southern strategy into
Right.
like other rural places. And that's why you see rural Pennsylvania and Indiana and Iowa and all these places have de-aligned. The last northern tier of the Midwest is still hanging in there, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
power bases of the parties have shifted completely. Democrats used to be a party of rural working class voters. Now it's a party of suburbanites, right? That stuff is not organic. It's been done by Republicans enhancing, and to this moment, enhancing that brand operation, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to win the party label. Like you can't outrun it. Now you might be able to outrun it to an extent if you are someone like John Kelly, okay, in
Mm-hmm.
Arizona with like NASA, but
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, you are tied to that brand. So what the work I'm doing is twofold. It is winning in the moment, okay, and maybe not
Mm-hmm.
winning with warm and fuzzies, okay.
Right.
By branding your opponent as a dangerous extreme, it's coming for your vagina. That's not warm
Right.
and fuzzy, okay? It may not make you feel warm and fuzzy, but it's going to win shit, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
also about creating a new image of the Republican Party that will build cycle to cycle so that we can tap in and enhance our own realignment, which is college educated people, even a modest exposure to college, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of inoculates you a little bit from propaganda. Yeah.
Yep.
And so we have much room to grow. There are white suburbanites right now in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, even places have de-aligned, like Ohio and Iowa, that are hungry. They don't feel good anymore about their brand, and they could be they can have their brand allegiance broken, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to have the right messaging comms structure to do that. And
Right.
when I first started this work, there are so many things. Like number one, this focus group that you just talked, or this research that you just talked about. I've been running
Mm-hmm.
into that for like years, but since I started this work, and it's just always so amusing to me. I'm like, yes, make messaging for liberals by liberals. Good idea, because like if it's got a collective theme, like I'm here to tell you, nobody gives a fuck about other people. Okay, we
Mm-hmm.
do, because we are freaks. Okay?
Right.
Like literally other people don't care about outgroups, and it doesn't matter if it's a racial outgroup, sexual outgroup, regional outgroup, whatever it is. They don't give a shit. They care about themselves. Okay.
Right.
And this message that you're testing may be warm and fuzzy and test great, But if it ain't going in there and triggering fear and loss aversion in the swing bucket, and the other side is, you're going to lose that conversation every time, because you're not selling a candidate, you're selling a brand. And right now, like our swing, like especially like lean red swing map strategy, it's the old strategy. It's been going for decades. It's not new, but that strategy ignores the role that party brand allegiance plays in the system. Not only ignores it, but runs counterintuitive to everything it has to say about voter behavior. And that's why it's been so destructive to us. And we've lost so much ground electorally, especially in red places, right? Because I'll get this. Well, how are we going to get Republicans by insulting Republicans? I'm like, well, how did they get fucking Democrats by insulting Democrats, dude? Everything that, like, the military and the consultant industrial complex that owns these access to these candidates right now, right? Everything that they're telling you to do, guys, it's not new. Okay. It's lost, it's lost, it's lost, it's lost, and it's going to lose again this cycle if you don't get off that model.
So this actually leads me to a question I've had for years, probably at this point. But one question I have in conversations with people and listening to the Bulwark, the focus group podcast, and
I love Sarah, by the way. She's doing some of the greatest work. She was, I met her through Never Trump meetings at the Niskanen Center years ago, and we're very different. Obviously, we're not friends, but like, I just admire her work a lot, and she's done so much work to try to get people to understand. Our party, our entire system is wrong. If you want to win elections, either hire me or a Republican, because if Democrats are advising you, they're telling you to do the wrong shit.
Yeah. I mean, part of what I think is fascinating about it is that, and the question I find myself having is, what is, you continue to see these polling questions where it's like any given Republican is stronger on, defense, stronger on the economy, just stronger in general. And that's their brand. The question of what is the Democrats' brand, I think is the one that feels, even as a Democrat, hard to get my arms around. And
I can tell you right now, there is a brand for Democrats, dear.
So I want to share my Tom Friedman anecdote with you and see if I'm guessing correctly, which is a woman I know here who born and raised in Montauk, small, fishing village Montauk, not resort land Montauk. Doesn't use the subway when she goes into the city, walks because she's terrified of like getting it wrong in the subway.
Oh yeah, the subway is hard for me too.
It is not easy.
I'm like logistic. I'm very conditionally smart, man. That
way. But like, she was describing how she did not watch the debate, and the reason she did not watch the debate was she said, "I'm never getting those hours back." And I already know the guy's going to get up there and he's going to blah, blah, blah. And the lady's going to get up there and she's going to pat me on the head and tell me whatever she thinks I want to hear. And my takeaway from that was her generic Republican. I don't know if actually, I'm not sure I agree that this one would be generic Republican. Her Trump brand is he's boring. Her any given Democrat brand is they don't mean what they say.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's part of it. Honestly, when in 2020, I mean, this is 4 years down the road now, guys. So all this change, if I sound urgent, there's a reason.
Yeah.
So in 2020, still trying to convince Democrats you have a brand problem, right? Some people are, not Jamie, but others in the party are really, oh no, we don't have a brand. I'm like, no, dude, you guys, like outside of DC, I'm here to tell you, people don't like you.
Yeah.
And the reason is that your brand hasn't been defined by you. Okay, because you don't talk about party shit. You take the word Democrat at everything you do, right? And so there's no brand definition. I mean, now the Harris campaign is working on that. The Harris campaign is the exception now with the asterisk on all of this for me.
Right.
But not only have we not branded ourselves, we haven't branded them. Right. And they've been branding us uninterrupted. So in 2020, when I still had my survey research center, which was the greatest time of my life in terms of data, because I could and I could
Mm-hmm.
make everything gold medal, gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I did a survey, a national survey, and I asked people, what's the first word that pops in your mind when you hear certain things, right? And I put all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of stuff, the Supreme Court, Donald Trump, whatever. But I also put in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So you
Mm-hmm.
get back for the Republican Party. Of course, people who like Republicans are going to give a positive word. People who don't like Republicans are going to give a negative word. But there's a bunch of different words. Obviously, national security and the economy. Economy is number one. That's brand. Get to the Democrats. Guess what the number one word was, guys? It wasn't even close. There's one big ass word in the middle of the graph. Socialist. Okay. And
Socialist.
the reason is for 15 years now, they have stood on the House floor, not just
Mm-hmm.
your crazy Louis Gohmers. It started there, yes. Okay. But
Mm-hmm.
by 2015, it had percolated up to Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell. They always say the word socialist. You can watch
Mm-hmm.
hours of committee hearings, and there's almost never a time when a Republican opens his mouth where they don't use the word Democrat socialist.
Socialist.
Okay, Democrat socialist, and 15 years of that has produced an electorate that will assign us that brand. Okay, like
Mm-hmm.
I've retested it in 4 years, but I'm guessing it hasn't gotten any better, folks. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's so important for us to make this strategic shift, because the comms system that I'm trying to orient and introduce ends that, and it's about branding. Issue ownership is very frustrating. So we talked about the advantage that you could do any Republican in a poll and they would have an advantage on economy and national security. And it's a very important point I want people to not hear. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is, like, it could be Mitt Romney, it could be George Bush, it could be anybody, and they would have an advantage over Harris. And that is 20 years of
Mm-hmm.
bad national security policy and bad economic policy coming out of Republicans that produced two really
Mm-hmm.
catastrophic economic events. One of them not so much his fault, but whatever, right?
Right.
And yet the broader perception is that these people are good on national security and good on defense and the economic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we don't change that, and number one, the economy is always going to be the number one issue. What's
Right.
really frustrating is that, like, the American middle class was built by Democrats. Democrats are the ones that got Medicare, Social Security. Yes, the unions agitated, but who passed the 40-hour work week? Democrats, liberals, and liberals. Okay,
Right.
like we're 40 years into an economic experiment that even the creators called voodoo, and it has
Mm-hmm.
decimated the American middle class. Right? We
Right.
have to tell this story. It has to be. We have to tell, like, Americans are super mad about the economy, but we do nothing to direct their ire. And you can really see this too in climate change and gun attitudes
Mm-hmm.
amongst young voters, because they're very, very fucking mad about
Right.
inaction on climate change and guns, but they do not associate that inaction with the Republican Party. They
Right.
associate it with what we told them to associate it with in our less partisan comms, which was the NRA or big oil or big pharma or whoever the victim, the guy is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And who's the problem? Well, the problem was we don't have 60 votes in the Republican Senate, because they would rather see us all gunned down wherever the hell we are than give an inch on gun sanity. Okay. And we have to
Mm-hmm.
direct that ire down. That's the same thing for, like, the cynicalism that's pervading our trusted institutions. That's why we have a wildfire situation here this fall, but we have a climate change situation in terms of our public,
Mm.
like the health of our democracy. And we have to fix it, because one of the downsides about that is that the public is not equipped to update its priors. Okay.
Right.
And, if you ask about issues Democrats own, they own guns, they own education. Okay. Those two are never going to be the number one issue,
One.
which is always
Mm-hmm.
going to be the economy. And so, the credit claiming stuff to me is useless without the contrast. Democrats give, Republicans take, right? What we're trying to trigger
Mm-hmm.
is our brand up, our brand down in every piece of comms. And that means a
Right.
paid ad, a copy on a tweet, a conversation on Meet the Press. Our brand up, their brand down. We got to be doing that, and we got to centralize that effort. Jeffrey, Schumer, Pelosi, the panelists, the surrogates, everyone has to be humming the same tune. Without
Mm-hmm.
centralization, we are not going to be in a position to reverse the course of our democracy. So, that's why that work is so important. And it's very hard to get people. It's not just tweaking at the trees of what in the leaves of what Democrats have been doing. I'm telling them, no, your entire system, root and branch out.
Right.
Okay. It's all based on a flawed assumption of an informed and engaged electorate that doesn't exist. And
Right.
a
Right.
complete ignorance of how powerful the party label is in vote choice, right? And therefore, that's why I would tell people who you had on who are like, oh, we got, in this case, I'm sure positive shit does test very well because Harris is an unknown. And like I said, in this particular case, you have to have some of that positive messaging, right? This is not a traditional campaign. So I'm not saying it's always wrong. There's a universal rule. But what's going to win the election for Harris is how many voters in Wisconsin, swing voters, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, hear that Donald Trump banned abortion and women are dying. Like, it's just that simple. And the assumption of a lot of our political class or consultant class here is that voters already know that. Well, they do not know that. And they will never know that unless we find a way to tell them through forcing them to look paid ads, because they're not going to watch the news. Their algorithm isn't going to produce it, because if you're not into politics, social media completely insulates you from political content now, because they figured out that people who don't like politics, which is 70% of us, will get offline if they're getting targeted with political content, right? So like Facebook pretends like it's all about altruism. We got used and abused by the Trump campaign. It's about maximizing use. And if you try to give political content to people who don't want it, they log off. So now we have people who literally do not know anything about Donald Trump's indictments. Okay. They know he did something wrong and something happened on January 6th. That's it. That's all they know. And that's all they're ever going to know unless you find a way to pay to tell them. And so the assumption that everybody already knows, which I run into a lot, like, well, Rachel, why do we have to run on Roe? Everyone knows that. I'm like, nobody knows that. There are women walking into Florida right now. Go call the clinics. They'll tell you. Oh shit, really? I can't get an abortion? Why?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality of the electorate. We got to meet it where it is.
This feels like, Dobbs, I think, was one of the things that, I don't know. Again, maybe it's because I'm exposed to people who mistake all sorts of things. And so I'm used to people mistaking things. But when I look at the kind of question types on a lot of the public polls, and I assume that there are additional questions in the private polls, but also some are very similar to what I'm seeing in whatever, New York Times, Siena, or CNN, SSRS, whoever's doing it. These, even like take a battery of issues, right? The economy, immigration, abortion, whatever. Each one of those words contains a constellation of meanings to whoever is looking at it. And it's always been kind of unclear to me that the person receiving that data knows for sure what that means to the person who's answering it. Like last year, there were polls, like NBC did a few, and others asking about the importance of democracy. YouGov, I think, did a couple polls like this as well. And it was polling really high. And I was like, sure, because there are plenty of Republicans who also think that Democrats are a threat to democracy.
Oh, yeah,
right?
When I started this work after Jan 6, I ran a survey to show people this because no one would believe me. I'm like, dude, and this is, February, March of 2021, I said, look, I'm going to run a survey and I'm going to show you that the only people in America who think democracy is is in danger right now are the people who just stormed the Capitol, dude. There's none of that awareness on our side. People have no fucking idea, and we have to change that. And that's what we've been doing for 4 years. But go on.
Well, it suggests to me that we have a kind of almost like willful blindness for what is actually happening in voters and potential voters' minds. And that then we console ourselves with these kind of correlations of what, this sort of answer has correlated with this sort of voting or this sort of outcome in the past. And that what you're getting at is things that, again, as a marketing researcher would be of more interest to me, which is, what is the brand in people's minds? And then what are effective ways of rebranding them and rebranding you, right? Like these are the strategic questions that I spend most of my working life on. what would research have to, you've done it, I'm sure, but like how should polling or political research work? What kinds of work would be better than what we're getting?
Ah, I am so glad you served me that up, dude. Because I'm just, it's so hard for me not to have a polling firm. Like, just for disclosure, I take care of
Hmm.
my disabled son. So I'm a consultant that I can't work like a crazy person
Hmm.
anymore. So I can't have my own polling firm. And that means I can't show people how this assumption of informed and engaged electorate also fucks up polling. Okay. But
Hmm.
here's a great example of what happened when I did have a firm and I was able to do this in 2020 or 2019, whatever, I can't remember. When I was in Lawson Center in Virginia, the Virginia governor, Ralph Northam, had a scandal. And that scandal was that VMI, the Virginia Military Institute pictures that emerged of him wearing blackface. Okay.
Hmm.
And this was a big ass scandal on the Beltway media. So like it pounded for, almost a week, especially as Northam was like, I'm going to leave. No, I'm not, da, da, da. You know what I mean? Like it was
Hmm.
a big, big, big story. And so the pollsters came, right? The national pollsters, right? And they start running surveys about what do you think about Ralph Northam, da, 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 da. And I'm like, these motherfuckers don't even know. Okay. So
Yeah.
I fielded a survey to test, like, there's no perfect way to get into this, right? So
Hmm.
I thought about it, noodled on it, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to ask them, like, have you read, seen, or heard, which is kind of standard language, anything about Virginia's Governor Ralph Northam recently, right? Well, guess what? 70% had never had no, I don't know anything, right? So
Yeah.
like this thing that we were like, it was, in our world, catastrophic and everyone's freaking out.
Hmm.
Like 70% of people who lived in Virginia, who
Right.
were not even typical Virginians because they're in my survey sample, which is pulled from the voting file. So they're the
Hmm.
voting half of the state, the most
Right.
engaged half. They're like, I haven't heard anything about Ralph Northam. Okay. Like,
Right.
because they don't watch any political news. So how are you supposed to render a verdict on something you have no fucking idea what the pollster is talking about, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what you're talking about. Like, so these distortions of like what we're doing with data, they're very bad, actually.
Hmm.
There's many, many things I see done in survey research that violate this fact of assuming voters know what the thing you're polling them about is, broadly speaking, or even just assuming that they're conceptualizing it, right,
Hmm.
in a way that is relatable to how you're analytically anticipating it, right?
Hmm.
And it's a trade-off. So like in survey research, the more specific you are, the more you're pushing a response. So,
Hmm.
do you want to say, how do you feel about democracy, and then define it in some specific concrete way for them to render a verdict? I mean, always you're making a sacrifice in the data, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But your point is exactly dead on. Like, we are misabusing a lot of tools. I mean, certainly when it comes to anticipating who's going to win a toss-up race, right? These surveys are
Hmm.
not designed to tell us who's going to win a 2-point contest. They literally scientifically cannot do that, right?
Right.
And yet we're like, you know what I mean? But the
Yes.
other thing is this assumption that people have any idea what you're talking about. And it's so powerful. One time ran a experiment, and it wasn't so much ignorance, but it was relying on ignorance. What I was trying to show people is actually people's opinions are completely conditioned on their partisan view. All
Hmm.
right. If they're a Trump person, they're going to love it if Trump introduces it, and not if it's a Democrat. Same policy introduced.
Right.
And I tested this shit to show effect size is like 40, 50 points of swing. Okay.
Hmm.
In issues that people can't really, I mean, obviously more people can assign abortion, guns to the two parties. So I stuck with issues that were less salient and
Hmm.
less well known. And, I would have a sample of a group who got it with the party that actually does support it. Then the other part of the sample would get it with Trump supporting it. And you would see in the crosstabs at the party level, massive swings. And
Right.
what that tells you is they don't know jack shit, but they still know this Q, and this Q sorts their political universe so much that it can swing opinion on something like cap and trade by 45 points amongst Republicans just by telling them it's coming from their team, right?
Right.
And that's not, that could not happen in an informed and engaged electorate that has the information reservoir that your listeners or I or you are bringing into bear to make sense of the political world.
Now I want to like figure out a way to get you a team to do this research all the time, because it is just, as a researcher, I find it so incredibly frustrating, because we're in the middle of a project right now where we asked a question just as an articulation question for recruiting qualitative, and discovered that the phrase we're just asking people about something they like to drink that's, you know, that's just like a normal soda kind of drink, soda,
Yeah,
non-alcoholic beverage. But by saying non-alcoholic beverage, half of our sample interpreted non-alcoholic beverage as the whole NA category of beer and wine and cocktail replacements and mocktails.
yeah,
And we were just talking about juice and soda. And every other question we'd ask them was about like other not drinking products.
right.
We never introduced anything about alcohol in any of the other questions. If you believe in priming, you would think that we would not have taken them there. But that
Right,
non-alcoholic for half of them is a new category
yeah,
that
yeah.
is something specific. And so it just, every time I look at these batteries, I'm like, but what does that mean to people when they select that? What do they think it means? And then to
Yes,
your point about these kind of broad strokes heuristics of, if I've got a jersey hanging in my closet, which jersey applies to this topic or to this
exactly.
election is the most important thing. And then there are other things that might matter after that. But I think this question of the, you know, uninformed electorate and a kind of political culture that is designed really for us to be uninformed, and only the weirdos like
Oh,
us pay
yes,
attention.
yes.
Um, like, you have to be comfortable your entire adolescence being told you're a weirdo and a nerd in order to be us, right? Like,
Yes, you
you have
do.
to get used to that, um, which
Or
makes
you
us
just,
specific,
figure out, actually, I'm going to not be a nerd around normal humans.
right? I didn't figure that out, but if you did, I applaud you. But there
A
is
lot
this.
easier to do with the Grateful Dead world, you know?
Yes,
You got some
yes,
dreadlocks and an oatmeal Smith, a Sammy Smith oatmeal stout. You're okay, you know?
yeah,
You can be kind of wonky.
yeah. My choice, I think, was sort of semi accidentally aligning myself with not. So I went to University of Oregon, and so you may
Go Ducks.
remember. Yes, you may remember the Oregon Commentator. I don't know if it still exists. It was the conservative student magazine.
No, I think I do remember that now. Yeah.
I was the publisher for like 2.5 years of that. I
Okay.
have not been ever in my life conservative.
Just needed a job, eh?
I thought they were funny. Like,
Well,
mostly I
here's what
thought,
I'll tell you, dude. Here in Eugene, I am apparently a raging moderate, right? So like
right.
moving from here to go do my PhD at University of Georgia, I'm the
Oh,
same person. But when I physically moved from here, raging moderate, I became the like socialist liberal.
sure. Yes.
Like it's all relative, right? So like saying you're a conservative magazine editor in the University of Oregon is just, it's not the same thing. Just want to
This is
free
true.
Farrah of that, okay?
This is
All right.
true. Some of them did go on to become Mark Hemingway, Molly Hemingway's husband, but some of them grew up to be normies. In any case, where was I going with that? The heuristics thing and the decision to care about it. One of the things you talk a lot about as like an obligation of the press who's spending all of this time, money, and effort on polling is like, I don't know, what if you covered democracy relentlessly and
Yes.
actually gave people something they could like hang on to about how things do work and more importantly, what's at stake
Yes.
in the whole exercise. And I think this is particularly poignant to me for a variety of reasons. One is I graduated from the J school. Even though I, specialized in advertising, I still care about journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I have interviewed a couple of journalists who cover this now, and there is just this wonderful default setting that they all seem to have of this too shall pass and we will have a reversion to the mean. And this seems to
Yes.
be a very strong journalistic bias. So strong that you have Joe Kahn at the New York Times, Jay Caspian Kang at the New Yorker, other places saying, I don't think it's my job as a journalist to defend democracy, which blows my mind because, but for democracy, you don't have a job.
No doubt.
So, what are we even talking about here? So, maybe just like riff for a bit on what do you mean when you talk about that obligation, that it's not just like the horse race, it's also the stakes. And I mean, Mike Podorza talks about this too. Don't cover the odds. Or no, that's Jay Rosen talks about don't cover the odds, cover the stakes or whatever. But
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about that role that
Yeah.
needs to be filled.
Oh man, I mean, I have a media chapter in the book because it's impossible to talk about the Republican machine, its
Mm-hmm.
strategic comms, and not only in cover. Everyone kind of knows about their ecosystem. I mean, right? But what they
Yeah.
don't understand is how they manipulate and use our ecosystem. So that's really what I lay out in the book, and I talk about how the journalistic norms in this country of both sides, right? So like you
Mm-hmm.
have a thing, you call each campaign, they issue a statement, right? And like our impulse is, to report the statement without context. Well, what happens when one of those statements is propaganda designed to manipulate opinion, right? It's
Right.
very difficult. I will say this, abstract things are hard. And that's why when Dobbs was repealed, the day that memo leaked, I was in my truck singing I'm still a rat in a cage, and I was pissed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a woman.
Yep.
But I also was delighted as a strategist trying to keep American democracy from collapsing into a fascist cult, and knowing that Republicans planned to use control of government in Michigan if they got it, in Arizona if they got
Mm-hmm.
it, to keep the election from being free and fair. I was delighted because I knew now I had a concrete democracy thing. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing to talk about democracy in the abstract. And like, I think my neurotypical momming now has taught me how other people hear words different, right? So
Mm-hmm.
autistic people are very literal. They take very things. So when I do a speech and I'd say, you got to tell people about Dobbs, they think I mean literally the word Dobbs, and what I mean is, much more abstract than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Dobbs made the abstract concrete. It
Yes.
allowed us to point to a thing that is your freedom and your civil liberty that has now been compromised by Republican overreach, big government overreach, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like getting it out of that abstract was a huge strategic asset, right? But it was only an asset where people decided to tell the electorate and make it the most important thing. Because, I show in the book, I mean, I just can't keep beating this dead horse because all of the work you do, all the polling work, and all the work in electioneering it's all going to be problematic if it doesn't accept the fact of the electorate being not informed and not engaged,
Mm-hmm.
because it changes everything. And then you become a cognizant. Okay, there's going to be a Dobbs effect, but not everywhere. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
where it's enhanced and focused on, right?
Right.
And I don't know that we could have done what we did in 22 without having them repeal a freedom and make it
Yep.
concrete for people what freedom and democracy means, right? It means this thing. And like, you can really focus in on that thing and define your rights, your freedom, individual liberty, these more
Mm-hmm.
esoteric, things around, this one issue. And then, to circle full circle, like you'll never catch me say pregnant person in an ad. Okay. Never,
Yeah.
ever, ever. Why? Okay. There's 6 fucking people that are biological women who are transitioned, and now they're men, but they're biologically capable of having babies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I want those people protected. I care for them. I want them to have the legal rights to live the way that they want to. But that is not going to be an effective message when I'm trying to win an election. Okay. So if I want to win an election, I want to cut an ad. I want to use the most sympathetic woman. So not a person that got an abortion because they were too poor to have a baby, even though I believe that people should have an abortion if they want to, because they're too poor to have a baby. I want to win shit. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at maximizing the probability of winning. So I want the most sympathetic character, which is this, Hadley person down in Kentucky that
Yep.
First, Bashir is using, now the Harris campaign is using as a surrogate. 14-year-old rape victim of incest who would have been forced to bear her rapist baby. You win power on the most salient argument that you can make on one topic because the electorate does not pay attention to things. So if you're talking about 6 things, you're never getting through. And that's what Republicans have figured out. And CRT, the chapter in the book about CRT in Virginia, is an example of that. Glenn Youngkin doesn't give a fuck about public education, let alone race curriculum in public education. If he was our guy, right, he'd come through our consultants. They'd be like, "Oh, you're a business guy. Go talk about business stuff." Right? And some asshole like me on the other side, where they actually get listened to, came in and said, "Hey, Glenn, we think we can flip this long shot seat because it's a long shot seat, right? If we wedge race in schools and tell white suburbanites they're making your kids feel bad about being white." I mean, that's what CRT is meant to do, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that people can't define it. What we need is people to know Trump equals Project 2025 equals bad. Okay. We don't need them to be able to articulate why it's bad, how it's bad. We need that part to get across to this brain level of the tuned out electorate. Right. And so, it's a long way of going about and talking about the more centralized you are. And let's say we were in Pennsylvania right now, we'd want all the House state legislative candidates, the House, federal House districts that are competitive, and then the Senate race, Cassidy's race, all pounding this one message: extremist on abortion, national abortion ban, Project 2025, right? And with that, because we don't have their ecosystem and we never will, with that, we can make a cacophony of noise, which if any parent who's listening to this has ever read Horton Hears a Who from Dr. Seuss, it's a book about an elephant that finds a flower that has a speck that's a whole world. And because he's got giant elephant ears, he's the only one that can hear it. And they're like, "Dude, don't let them destroy our little world." And he's like, "Well, I can't, because they don't believe me that you exist. I need you to make enough noise that these monkeys can hear you and know that you're real, and then they won't destroy this flower that your world is living on." And so the mayor gets everybody in the town together, and they're banging pots and pans and yelling all in sync. And that, my friend, is what we need to be doing if we want to win elections. And, we have to be looking at the long-term problem. We have the short-term problem. The long-term problem is we've got a 2-party system. And one of them is very, very unhealthy right now. And either we can course correct it and save the entire country, or we don't do that work and find a way to change what we do now to do it. And we're careening off a cliff. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. One's unhealthy and the other one still wants to do all their homework.
Oh my God, still. I mean, you just said you recorded that a couple of weeks ago. 4 years I've been trying to fight against that infrastructure. And, they're still, again, in this particular case, because of the switch, you have to do some of this positive defining. But at least I'm seeing contrast ads, right? So at least they're doing the credit cleaning. I'm going to get you this, and everyone a house and a whatever, shot, right? Yeah. Everyone, right? But at least now they're like, and Donald Trump's going to steal all your shit, right? Like the end and Donald Trump part, to me, that's the more important part. And, I'm glad to see that at least the Harris campaign understands that.
So if I can end on one last question, it is about states that get taken for granted as being safe red, safe blue. And I'm asking this question because I live in one.
Okay.
That last time around, New York.
Oh, okay.
That last time lost a bunch of congressional districts that theoretically they shouldn't have lost.
Yeah.
And some of the polling recently has Harris only up 12-14 when Biden won by 20 plus or something last time. And so if that polling is accurate, then there is some sort of shift happening in New York voters. And I have my theories about part of that, which is the total bizarre nature of New York Democrats.
That and the fucking rampant corruption that always comes when one party is in power, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I live in the New York First. So this was Lee Zeldin's district for a little while. Before that, I think it was a Democratic district. But this time it's Nick LaLota, who's running for re-election against John Avlon. And John Avlon was a no labels guy originally, was a Giuliani speechwriter originally, is married to Margaret Hoover,
Mm.
is a dyed-in-the-wool centrist, and who, his campaign has been very interesting because he has been doing some of the blame wedge stuff, but is also like so dedicated to the centrist position. And I just keep looking at these states thinking, that you said something earlier about that kind of that wedge politics that the Republican Party has been so organized around for so long allows them to shift parts of places that have historically been Democratic. So even if like the state, a place like New York continues to be by and large a Democratic voting state, you have whole regions of it
Yes.
that are
Mhm.
not anymore, or that
Yep.
are trending away from that. And I guess the question there is like, we're fighting it out in the 6.5, 7.5, whatever it is, swing states. As was, what did he call it the other day? Nate Silver called it 7.5 swing states or something. The that is the shared focus because of the electoral college,
Right.
but it does have underneath it an assumption that there is some stability of red and blue states. And I have been alive long enough to remember California having Republican
Yep.
governors and New York having Republican governors
Yep.
and Oregon having two Republican senators.
Yep.
And, things change. So,
Mhm.
what do you make of that? Like, what is happening with the shifts in safe blue states or in safe red states where people are
Right.
getting
And
dissatisfied
this,
one way or the
this
other?
is why that degree that I went and got was so valuable. Because it is a PhD, right?
Yes.
And although I'm an armchair historian now, I've been studying the Third Reich for 4 years, World War
Mm-hmm.
II. I would never call myself a historian, no matter how many years I continue to study at that intensity, because that training matters. And here's why. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to explain to you exactly what's happening in New York, and I'm going to situate it into a larger conversation. Once upon the electorate is always in flux. Once
Yeah.
upon a time, the swing state of bellwetherness was Ohio, and that was
Mm-hmm.
just like 15 years ago. Okay,
Yep.
and now Ohio's off the map, and it's a slightly altered state. Like Arizona didn't used to be the swing state, right? So
Right.
like Georgia and Arizona came in. What is happening? Well, I can tell you what's happening. We're in a realignment de-alignment period. Actually, we're in a very long realignment period. It's 50 years now, so we're actually at the tail end of it. Where it started was in the Deep South. It started when Johnson, a Democrat from
Mm-hmm.
Texas, signed into law two pieces of legislation that destroyed segregation and white power in the South, right? The Civil Rights
Mm-hmm.
and the Voting Rights Act. At that point, white conservatives brand allegiance to the Democratic Party, which was a coalition of liberals and conservatives, massive post New Deal party that controlled Congress for like uninterrupted for like 40 years, guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's when that New Deal coalition fractured and conservatives broke away. And it's not like some of them went and switched literally to Republican Party, but much of it is moving, people coming from the North, all this other change. But eventually, when you fast forward to where we are in the cycle of realignment, the South used to have zero Democrats or Republicans in it. You couldn't find
Mm-hmm.
an elected Republican in the South in 1950, except for maybe one guy in one state house somewhere. That's it.
Right.
Okay. And now it's the opposite, Georgia being the exception. Okay. Now it's the opposite. That realignment, especially as Republicans, and Stuart Stevens, who I just did his show, he ran 5 presidential, he wrote a book, it
Mm-hmm.
was all a lie. He talks about the Southern strategy and how it started, and it was a dog whistly thing. And it was about, look, white conservatives in the South are pissed off about race. We can pick them up and bring them into the Republican coalition if we break their brand allegiance to the Democratic Party. So that's what they start to do. And as it got better and better, it started to spread northward, especially as it evolves. You see this shift. Like I said, Democrats were the urban or the rural party. Now they're the urban party, right? So you see that start to spread through the lower tiered Midwest, Indiana, right?
Mm-hmm.
Iowa. Iowa used to be a swing state. Iowa's gone. Okay.
Right.
Now it's been blunted in that top tier because of large urbanicity centers, Wisconsin being the least urbanicity
Mm-hmm.
between Michigan, Detroit, Philly, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Okay. So they have enough college educated and diverse electorate that it's kind of inoculated them from it. But
Mm-hmm.
that said, when you look at a state like Pennsylvania, specifically, you're still seeing that shift of that rural de-alignment. And right now there's a
Mm-hmm.
Republican, guy registering people in these counties. He's so excited at how many, but most of those people were voting Republican. They just hadn't changed their
Yeah.
registration, right? So now, as we have been defined as a party of socialist pedophiles that want to mutilate children's genitalia, that
Mm.
is the message they are paying to distribute. And they say every day, if you don't monitor right-wing media, every day that's what they say about us. They are using that to come after non-college educated voters everywhere. And
Mm.
they have made a shit ton of progress. And that's why, like, even in places that are blue, like Minnesota, some of these rural districts have flipped over. Okay. Even as the
Right.
states become more blue, these rural places are shifting. That is New York right now. Now, here's where it's not a problem. It's never going to be a problem statewide because the population center of New York City is always going to be the statewide determinant in the vote. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's
And we'll
always
vote
going
crazy, but we won't vote Republican.
to. Exactly. Those margins are going to go down, though, as long as we continue to have a unilateral brand assault coming from the right that is not mirrored and answered on the left to break brand allegiance, to bring more of this, because there are college educated people in these rural areas that are
Mm-hmm.
voting for Republicans right now that can be shifted over. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, you don't want to be in a position where you have where the one party has an advantage with working class people. Okay. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you can't just let that continue to run like a fire. Right. And that's where we've been up until today.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to get people to do something that's counterintuitive, in Montana. Well, how am I going to get, I'm John Tester, and I know Trump's going to win the state. Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, my electoral strategy has to take into account that I need Trump voters to vote for me. And I'm
Right.
not going to get those Trump voters to vote for me by attacking Trump or attacking Republicans. I have to get them by distancing myself from the Democratic brand and the Democratic Party, right? And like I said, the performance record of that strategy it's conclusive. It does not work. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. You have to come and interfere and say, okay, fine. You think that Republicans are great for you? I'm going to show you how the Republican Party has left you behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be a grievance style. Obviously, we're not going to wedge cultural war issues. I mean, here's a spoiler alert, folks. Like, rural America's always been culturally conservative. The urban and rural is a tale as old as time. In fact, when you look at World War II, why did the Nazis rise? Part of it was culture, guys, backlash to culture. Okay. So they have this weapon that they can use against us is very effective, but we have one too. And that's the performance record of the Republican Party. And
Right.
it has been dismal, right? So
Mm-hmm.
people are pissed and they want someone to blame for their angst. We should just be directing that blame right to where it belongs, which is the Republican Party. And then you create a separation, right? So it's,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to do that if we're insulting Republic? Well, how did they do it? Okay.
Right.
If it doesn't work, how did they go into these rural places and tell them Democrats suck, Democrats are radical, Democrats left you behind?
Mm-hmm.
They made ground, right? So, like,
Right.
what I mean? Get out of the testing lab. We're micro targeting our asses into obscurity. Okay. Before we worry about targeting Florida's Latino population with all of its diversity, with the Hondurans and the Guatemalans and the Puerto Ricans and the Cubans, how about we just tell that pool, the Latino pool, one fucking thing once, okay? Because we're not even touching 90% of those voters with any kind of paid contact at all, right? So, like, maybe first we start by telling them, Donald Trump's an extremist threat. He's coming for you. He wants to turn your country into Honduras, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe we start with that, and then
Right.
we can worry about all this regional variation one day in some fancy future world where we're contacting 90% of the Latinos in South Florida, right? But right now we're contacting 10% of them. We need it to be 50% of it. And that message needs to be, girl, you in trouble, right?
Right. Right.
One message, doesn't matter if you're Cuban, doesn't matter if you're Guatemalan. That's the message, right?
Right.
So it's been an odyssey. I'm so glad to be able to kind of flesh this out. It's been really tremendously valuable interview because so many people don't have that, expertise to kind of get into the weeds with me on it. And I'm glad.
Yeah, this has been great because I think you are singing notes that I sing with my clients all the time about the folly of micro-targeting, the folly of trying to have like too many brand pillars and too many reasons to believe and all of this stuff. And also just the taking for granted that people know a lot about the category in any
Right.
category.
Yeah.
And I think then there is this like super consistent message that is first person singular. It is about
Yes.
you. It's not about
Yes.
people like you. It's about
No.
you.
Yes.
And like these are just like block and tackle basic marketing. We have tons of research in marketing science to prove that this works. And yet we also, in my world, have people who think micro-targeting is where it's at. And we've got to thin slice all of our messaging. And you've got to have a message about this and this and this and this and this. And eventually people will put it all together.
That's
They
definitely
will never
what
put it
I
all together.
like. That's our system to what, that I was like, I have to fix that,
Yeah.
or we're all going to die. Right. So, like, oh man, it's just so amazing to me. I'm like, dude, you were even talking to Latinos in Florida about anything. Why in the fuck would you be focused on, this expensive micro target operation? Like, come on, dude. Are you crazy? Like, it's like rebuilding your
Yes.
house when it's still on fire. First, you got to go fix that, dude.
Yes.
You got to put it out,
We should have a whole separate conversation about the expensiveness of what everyone is doing
That
here,
too.
because I do find myself thinking of $1 billion and yet you're telling me how expensive everything is. No
No
brand
doubt.
ever has
And
$1 billion.
meanwhile, over there on the other side, $1 million, 900 million of it is on distribution, right? All that
Yep.
matters is distribution, folks. Like, that's what
Yep.
I realized. Like, oh, I can fix messaging all I want, but if I can't pay to distribute, it's useless, right? That's why
Yep.
I left the super PAC idea behind.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's like, oh, how much money are we going to continue to waste on all this research that's useless, right? When we know what will work and we know how to do it and we can see it being done. Same swing voter pool, guys. So don't tell me shit doesn't work with swing voters when it's happening on the other side of the same voters. Somehow with their research, it all magically works out. That tells me your research design is designed in a way that is biased to produce a conclusion, right? And everyone who has tested the stuff I'm arguing, which is, inform voters about David Schweikart's voting record on abortion. We're talking about massive effect sizes, right? So like where people are testing it, but again, every dollar you spend on a test is a dollar you didn't spend on distribute.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also a good place where I can quickly plug the book because you have a ton of really good examples of this and you get into some of the research you've done on this method to prove that it works, because apparently we have to prove that it works, even though we have 20 years of the other side proving that it works. And the book is called Hit 'em Where It Hurts, How to Save Democracy by Beating Republicans at Their Own Game, or We're All Gonna Die. But Rachel, I feel like
I just don't want to die. I want to live here. I was gone 13 years exiled on the East Coast. Okay. Now, if you're not a Pacific Northwest person, you don't understand what I mean by that. But if you are, then there ain't no living better than the Pacific Northwest, right? So like, and now I'm home next to my football stadium. I'm in the Big Ten. I have the best college football coach in the game in Dan Lanning. I'm on track to eventually get my national championship. I just want to live here in Eugene in peace. I don't want to have to flee the country because some madman collapses our government into a totalitarian fascist autocracy. Okay? It really is all very selfish. I just want to live here and watch my football.
I love it. Well, I'm going to go ahead. First of all, thank you for spending the time. Thank you for your flexibility today.
Oh, you too.
and this was more than worth it. So cool. I just really want to tell you how grateful I am for you spending the time with me.
If I can ever be of service, you let me know.
Crosstabs is hosted by me, Farrah Bostic, production by The Difference Engine, and edited now by Allison Preisinger of AMP Studio. Music from Audio Jungle by S Audio. Find us at crosstabspodcast.com, where you can subscribe to our weekly Substack, also available at crosstabspod.substack.com. Tell your friends about the show, subscribe on your favorite podcast service, and give the show a rating or review. I would love to hear from you, and it will help other people find the show. Email me if you have any questions, ideas for episode topics, suggestions for future guests, or want to talk about ways we can work together at farrah@crosstabspodcast.com. See you next time.